Okay, I think we're live now. Welcome everyone to our monthly series of TPS events. My name is Liani Baglietto. I'm a board member of the society. I in particularly look at the monthly calendar of events. And today we are very excited to have this STAG webinar, which will be chaired by Adriana. Adriana will introduce the other speakers later. But I'm just here to quickly let you know a bit more about the society and about the calendar of events and all the great things that we do, and hopefully to encourage you to join if you're not a member already. So, the Transport Planning Society is a society that seeks to facilitate, develop, and promote best practice and innovation in transport planning and provide a focus for dialogue between all those engaged in it, whatever their background. And the whatever their background part is very important to us. We understand that transport planners come from all of different forms of professional backgrounds, but we all have that desire to make our net. We all engage with the profession of transport in one way or another. And I think this is also something really important for us that allows us to bring these holistic, integrated conversations around transport planning. Uh, we are looking as a society to be influential and proactive in seeking improvements in policy and practice, and therefore why we promote the policy groups, of which Adriana will let you know a bit more later. We also provide a structured training program. We also have, we're also trying to engage more with our members, and especially to provide a bit more of a regional focus. So you will be hearing about more about that in the coming months, hopefully. And and yeah, we just also want to improve the public understanding and the image of transport planning. So in terms of events, I also want you to invite you to check the next event that we have for the next month on the 24th of June at lunchtime as well. This time at 12:30, we will be hosting an event, a webinar on developing a national approach to managing disruption. And we will be exploring how the UK can move towards a more consistent and strategic approach to disruption planning and mitigation. We will be particularly looking at travel demand management. So if you're interested in that, please do sign up. The link is on our webpage on the TPS events area. And in July, we'll also be hosting a number of events. We haven't put those in the website just yet because we're finalizing a few details, but please keep an eye on our website and on our newsletter because we will let you know about everything there. And if you do want to engage more with the society and the webpage, you can also find who the board directors are. We are very approachable, so please do let us know if you have any suggestions for the society or if you want to get involved further. And I think that's it for me. I will pass it on to Adriana to properly start with today's webinar.
Great, thanks, Liani. Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Adriana Moreno Pelayo. I'm a transport economist and associate director at ARAP, and also a member of TPS and one of the panels and subgroups that I will tell you a little bit about in a moment. Today, we have an exciting event, and we're very grateful that you're all here. We've had a lot of people register for it, and it's great to see that much interest in this event. We will be discussing how recent changes across the three appraisal frameworks, the overarching TAG framework that DfT leads on, but also WELTAG in Wales and STAG in Scotland, how they are evolving and developing further to improve how we make decisions about transport investment. And we have three great speakers that will be presenting on the topic in a moment. I will introduce them later. Just before we go into the event, I wanted first to tell you a little bit about the TPS policy panel. So the TPS policy panel started in November 2024 to fulfill objectives including ensuring TPS is influential and proactive in seeking improvements in policy and practice and in setting the transport agenda at the national, regional and local level, being proactive in the creation of an open, diverse and inclusive transport planning community, providing the widest possible forum to engage on relevant and topical transport planning issues, improving the public understanding and the image of transport planning and transport planners, promoting transport planning as a profession. And the panel aims to get rapid insights on key issues, and we have 5 subgroups: active travel and micromobility, influencing travel demand, rail pass and freight, governance, business case modeling and appraisal, and development and land use planning. I'm personally part, and I only joined a few months ago, of this subgroup on governance, business cases, and modeling and appraisal, which has 12 practitioners and is chaired by Neil Chadwick. In the past year or so, just to give you a little bit of an overview of our activities, the group has produced a report on the Green Book review and what this means for transport business cases. And this was subsequently presented to the DFT Joint Analysis Development Panel. The group also recently led a workshop on how place-based business cases should inform scheme business cases at the Interchange Conference in Manchester in March this year, leading to a policy report presented in Local Transport Today. And our panel members have been interviewed on matters related to different topics, such as the discount rate, uncertainty, and transport extra. So we discuss high-level policy issues to very detailed technical appraisal and modeling issues as well. We have a wide range of expertise within the group. So at the moment, we're very excited about the DFT's appraisal modeling and evaluation strategy, AMIS, which we understand is imminent. So Ivan might be able to say a little bit about it later. And just finally, before we go into the event, just wanted to say that new members are always welcome onto our panel. So if you're a TPS member and are interested in the modeling, appraisal, governance topics, please get in touch with Neil Chadwick, myself, or others. Great. So now on to the exciting event today. So I'm here today with representatives, as I said earlier, from DFT, Transport for Wales, and Transport Scotland to talk about appraisal and how it influences decision making. We're going to start first with Ivan, who's the head of transport economics and appraisal at DFT. Then we'll pass over to Louis Vaughan, senior project sponsor at Transport for Wales, who will cover WELTAG and how it differs from the general TAG framework, and also present a couple of practical case studies. And last but not least, we'll hear from Stephen Cragg, head of appraisal and model development and Transport Scotland, who will also talk about the perspective from Scotland and how looking further in the future to appraisal, how we can avoid making certain mistakes and improve how we carry out appraisal. How this is going to work is each presenter will share a few slides and present for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end for about 15-20 minutes, depending on timings. So I definitely encourage you to post questions in the chat, and then we'll read them out at the end after the presentations, and we'll moderate the Q&A. So I think that's everything. So thanks again for joining, and I think I will pass over to Ivan now.
Thanks, Adriana. Hopefully that's showing okay. So, hi, I'm Ivan Stead. I lead the Transport Economics and Appraisal team in the TASM division at DFT. So we are the central analytical division of DFT, responsible for collectively all aspects of TAG and our national transport model and our assurance and governance procedures around the economic cases for transport investments. If you have any questions after the talk, feel free to drop a line to the TASM mailbox there as well. So I've got 10 minutes. I'm going to talk for a bit about strategic context of appraisal in UK / a bit of an England and TAG focus. Talk a bit about some sort of future changes on the horizon, including some we've made, and then hopefully mention the AMES as well. So this just sets out a very high level the current context for appraisal and DFT. So DFT's overall purpose is to make transport better, and always has been, I think, and it remains to be the case that analysis is central to this purpose. And the AMES, or Appraisal Modelling Evaluation Strategy, that we're going to publish tomorrow, sets out our priorities for improving TAG over the next 5 years. So this has already been warned of in Better Connected, which commits us to optimizing decision making and appraisal. So that's one of the objectives set out in Better Connected. So this is, of course, a big year for appraisal. We're following hot on the tail of the Green Book review published at the end of of last year and the updated Green Book published this year. So this will be familiar to a lot of you, I'm sure, but just to provide a bit of framing as to what we already have in the transport analysis guidance DfT publishes. So we provide a pretty comprehensive, I think, set of tools for monetizing most of the key benefits of transport investment, and where we can't monetize them, there's sort of systematic approaches for looking at these impacts in a non-monetized way. So this is kind of my reflection, but I think looking across all the changes that we've made to our appraisal guidance recently, I think we have been doing a lot and continue to do this, a lot of work with researchers, consultancies, academics to develop and improve the kind of quality of our appraisal guidance. I think in most cases, this has been essentially helping to keep everything up to standard and incrementally improve bits of the guidance where we can get sufficient evidence. So I'm not going to go through all of these here, but some of the key technical things we've done in that space are updating the freight value of time for appraisal. So that was published as a forthcoming change recently, and will go out at the end of, well, again, go tomorrow as official tag. So that's going to make a significant and materially positive impact to the value for money of road projects. We have tweaked some of our key parameters for wider impact calculation, particularly around imperfect competition and the profile of agglomeration benefits over time. So this essentially reflects how, if you desire or seek to transform the productivity of an area through transport investment, these benefits won't happen immediately, but they might have a 5 to 10 year lead time. So it's reflecting that within the CBA framework that we publish. So that's a couple of the technical incremental things we've done. There's a whole load of things we've done to improve, like the presentation and usability of results, and some of these do link very strongly to the steer from the previous Green Book review, so not the one that's published in 2025, around presenting spending objectives analysis more clearly. So this is a new tag unit we published in response to the previous Green Book review, which sets very clear guidance for promoters on essentially mapping the outcomes of an appraisal to what spending objectives are, to help fulfill the Green Book requirement that all options being appraised for value for money must meet these strategic objectives. We've done something to improve the presentation of carbon analysis as well, and we introduced brand new tag units on place-based guidance, so place-based analysis. One of the key missions of the government that you've also heard a lot about in the press is to do as much as we can to help grow the economy. So this is just a couple of slides which set out how we think about these issues of DfT and how they're reflected in our appraisal guidance, because I think the two are quite consistent by and large. So I won't read out this diagram, but there's a few key channels through which we posit transport can help grow the economy. And if you look through these one by one, hopefully you'll be able to, in your own mind, think where this comes through in tags. So obviously we've got lower costs and value of time saving. We've got access to more and better jobs. We've got better and sort of the benefits of better ideas, aka agglomeration, which can stimulate innovation and productivity growth. There are probably things you could say we're missing, but this is a useful framework, I think. Just to be even more explicit, it's clear in the current definition of value for money in the Green Book that ultimately DfT is interested in looking at how schemes impact all of society, so not just GDP impacts, but also any impacts on well-being and welfare beyond that. And there are some, but actually when you map these things across, there's a pretty good level of correspondence and correlation between what goes into GDP and what goes into welfare. So this is also reflected in an update we published, a tag just over a year ago now, on providing guidance for promoters to map their GDP impacts to welfare impacts and vice versa. So essentially, given a set of tag appraisal results, there's now guidance to allow people to show directly what this means for the growth return of a project. And it essentially aligns with this eyeball diagram here. So that's some of the recent things we've done. I thought I'd quickly mention the Green Book and what some of the key changes were that were published recently. So one is a clear de-emphasis of primacy of the benefit cost ratio in decision making, and essentially saying that for government appraisals, a holistic view of value for money needs to be taken, looking at not just what can be monetized, but also unmonetized impacts and distributional concerns. Now, I think in DFT, we've been doing this for a long time. So since 2009, at least, we've had a value for money framework. So we were kind of already were thinking beyond the BCR, in my view. So in essence, this is the Green Book catching up with aspects of TAG, if I can be slightly tongue in cheek, but it's good to have this like consistent focus on value for money across government. The second one is looking at the long-term benefits of investment. So this is really work in progress. There's a discount rate review being undertaken at the moment, the terms of reference to which are published, and that will report at the end of June. So that is likely to lead to some changes to the discount rate, I think, but obviously we'll have to wait and see what the review team think about that. Some updates on private finance, which we're going to bring into TAG tomorrow. So the details of these have already been published as forthcoming changes for those who want to see more detail. But these will have significant effects for how we're looking at the value for money for some real live cases where the government is considering uses of private finance to deliver projects. I'm going to go over this quickly because my main point here was just to emphasize that in the new Green Book, the core concept of value for money is quite enduring. It hasn't really changed since 2003. The key thing we have now is this precondition that all schemes have to meet strategic objectives before they can be assessed for value for money at a full appraisal stage. But then at that stage, it's really important to note that this is still a framework based on social welfare impacts. So essentially all of these categories of impacts here that are described in this slide. And this is a slide that I will credit to my colleague, Chris Manzala-Ryan, just make that point in a slightly more practical way. I do sometimes see these arguments being made. It's not the case that you get to the end of appraisal and go, this case looks a bit weak, but hey, the strategic case is really strong. So can I just bump up the value for money a bit? That's not how the agreement process works. It's more of a sequential process where you have to set your objectives clearly at the start, scope and appraise options which should deliver them, and then of those options use value for money and welfare appraisal tools to try and optimize the choice of option within this kind of basket of options which are all helping to push in the right strategic direction. So just quickly on some future directions, and I've got about 1 minute left. So I've talked about value of time already. This is something that we've published, so I won't dwell on this. So this is a big change that we made to significantly increase the value of time for freight in appraisal. Some of the research reports we publish tomorrow will cover these next 3 slides. So we've been doing research on distributional weights, which could lead to us to essentially embed the Green Book guidance that have a greater weight on benefits to poorer groups. We've been doing research on morbidity impacts. So this is all very indicative sensitivity testing that we've done, but there's a growing body of evidence that active travel can deliver significant benefits beyond mortality reductions. It can also improve people's quality of life and their level of health. And then we're also going to we have published actually research looking at valuing unemployment benefit, and we're continuing to work to try and get this into TAG. And that's my timer, so I'll stop and just leave the slide here quickly, just to outline kind of what we're going to be delivering as the first phases of the AMES. But you'll be able to see more of that tomorrow when it's published. Thank you. I will just stop sharing now. Yeah.
Thanks, Ivan. Maybe we can come back to that later. I think we're doing well in terms of time. So, but that was really helpful. I'll pass over now to Louis, if you're okay to share screen. Thanks.
Hi all, good afternoon. I'm Louis Vaughan, a senior sponsor here at Transport for Wales. I do have a decade of experience in transport planning, mainly based in business case and appraisal. But the last 2 months, I've now moved to a senior sponsor role here at TFW. I'm here to talk to you all today about WELTAG and how it's different from UK appraisal. Different from other UK appraisals in terms of guidance, and then the different why. But in terms to frame that conversation, I'm going to start off with the golden circle. Now, this was something coined by a guy called Simon Sinek, who wrote a book, Start With Why. And he basically analyzed truly inspirational companies and leaders and said that they communicate from the inside out. So I'm going to use that as the basis of kind of like how I frame the conversation today. So I'm going to start with the why. Why do we appraise transport schemes at all? And why does Wales take a distinct approach? How Wales translates its purpose into a decision-making framework, and what's the outcome of this? What the Welsh and WELTAG approach produces, and the tangible outputs and differences as a result of this. So I'm going to start with the why. The why. Why do we appraise transport schemes at all? And why does Wales take a distinct approach? So appraisal guidance exists to ensure public money delivers public value socially, economically, environmentally. Each nation shares this purpose, but their priorities differ, reflecting political, cultural, and legislative contexts that form the value for money judgment. So in Wales, the why in WELTAG is shaped by two key policies, one of which is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And for those that don't know on the call, this is a really quite a landmark piece of legislation here within Wales. It ensures that public bodies or public service bodies account for the 7 wellbeing goals shown on screen there and measure their performance against them in terms of their outputs and outcomes. This is delivered through the 5 ways of working illustrated on screen. And this is really driving the policy here in Wales. And I think it's something that UK government are looking at broader aspect. And I think other governments around the world, such as New Zealand, have kind of looked at this framework and seek to adopt it in the future. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act was then used to shape the Welsh Transport Strategy here in Wales, which was published in 2021. It embedded the 7 wellbeing goals and the 5 ways of working into a vision, as you can see on screen there, an accessible, sustainable and efficient transport system, and then 3 priorities and 4 wellbeing ambitions shown there on screen. So good for people and communities, good for the environment, good for places in the economy, and good for culture and the Welsh language. These policies set out the commitment to sustainable transport and modal shift and desire to embed long-term thinking and place-based outcomes. And that's a key topic. I think it's obviously now reflected, as Ivan said, in the tag appraisal guidance in terms of place-based, and obviously distribution analysis is something we're really primarily focused on in Wales. In terms of the principles that shape WELTAG, so there is an integrated wellbeing appraisal framework that we assess all schemes against as part of the wellbeing dimension, which I'll come on to in a bit. It turns WELTAG and the purpose of WELTAG schemes in Wales into a structured decision-making framework, and is built around the 4 ambitions I just read out there on screen in the Welsh Transport Strategy, with subcategories as the basis of appraisal. So this means that there is a greater focus on qualitative outcomes, community involvement, and wellbeing goals. As you can see there on screen, is the project good for people and communities? We look at equality, health, and how it improves safety and confidence as 3 key categories within that ambition. There's less of a focus on quantitative BCRs, which I'll come on to in a bit, though WELTAG guidance can be used to supplement the appraisal for quantitative analysis, and that is stipulated in the guidance. The economic dimension has also been renamed the wellbeing dimension, so that brings that into focus then. It's less about numbers, more about the qualitative analysis and the outcomes that directly influence people's decisions and the way they use transport systems. Other key principles include this is a big push now here within WELTAG and Wales to a proportionate approach to appraisal for 3 different categories, and obviously in terms of how we approach the appraisal of transport schemes. So we've got WELTAG Lite, which is a single business case that combines, your typical stages 1 to 3, your SOBC, OBC, and FBC into one report. Typically, this is used for like low risk schemes, such as active travel schemes, or schemes that are of lower investment value. But it means we can expedite the delivery, and essentially not stuck in the kind of like business case process, and we can get schemes on the ground quicker and make that change and deliver that benefit to end users quicker. There's also WAGOTAG standard. So this is quite similar to your traditional kind of like tag framework or green book framework. It separates the reports out at stage 1, a traditional SOBC as mentioned, stage 2, OBC, and then stage 3, which is the full business case. Key omission of WELTAG standards, though, is the reliance on BCRs, which comes into WELTAG Plus. So this is for more complex programs and projects with significant investment and risk. And even though this integrated wellbeing appraisal is still used, is supplemented by that additional modelling and benefit to cost ratios in order to, help decision-making process or aid the decision-making process. There's also the introduction of a stage 0 case for change for all transport policies, programmes and projects. And this is to be done in-house by local authorities, ourselves as Transport for Wales, and obviously like the Trunk Road agent, and not to be done by consultants, aligning with the DfT's business case strategic assessment stage. So this is really important change, and obviously brings a lot of resources into in-house to set that case for change for a lot of schemes, and obviously the direction of them going forward. So what does it look like in practice? The what? The tangible outputs and differences, the key ones in WELTAG, is there a strong integration of wellbeing goals, climate and modal shift objectives, and distributional inequality impacts, with a focus on the end users, what they want, and why we're doing the scheme. I mean, I can refer to Transport for Humans on this in terms of how we're trying to get away from treating humans as cargo in the transport sort of sphere, and as humans, you know, and ensuring that we give the end users what they want in terms of journey quality, benefits, etc., and instead of focusing on journey time primarily. The Greenburn update obviously incorporates that going forward in terms of place-based institutional analysis, and then the DfT's integrated transport strategy is really something we're trying to promote here in Wales, particularly through TFW and our T network. You know, one ticket, one timetable, one team is our motto. We're looking to integrate bus and rail together through that one ticket, one timetable, so you've got a seamless transport journey to your end destination, which we think is a real big shift here and the focus for us going forward and through WELTAG. In other nations, a scheme might be justified primarily on journey time savings. In Wales, the same schemes demonstrate a contribution to well-being, climate and long-term societal outcomes. I think this is a really key focus, and I just want to illustrate it here in this video quickly. I think something we're really quite proud of in Wales, and it's not necessarily unique, but something maybe you don't see as frequent as it should be around. So I'll just stop there. So obviously, as you can all see on screen there, is the level boarding feature. There's a lot of rolling stock now here in Wales. Obviously, that takes a lot longer for the platform to the extending platform from the train to meet the platform at the station, roughly about 60 seconds longer. And over a route of 15 stations, that's 15 extra minutes. In terms of journey time savings, if we were quantify that, that would obviously be a disbenefit. But we're not meeting the needs of our people by, you know, creating a seamless journey whereby people with disabilities, etc., can access it, or even myself with a bike there is so much nicer. And I'd rather wait on a train 15 minutes longer to have that experience as an end user. So I think that's a key outcome we're obviously delivering here. Just to kind of like capture that, each nation's appraisal framework is a reflection of its policies, values and priorities and vision for the future. Wales has chosen a well-being-led, future-focused why and framed it through WELTAG. And I just want to end in this concluding statement. Different nations have different frameworks because they start with a different why. And obviously our why in Wales is slightly different to that of the other UK nations. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis. That's really interesting and really great to see that practical example about how you are prioritizing or considering well-being in your appraisal. So now on to Stephen from Transport Scotland. Over to you.
Thanks, Shanna. My screen sharing.
Yeah,
And you can
I
hear
can
me
see
okay?
your screen.
You can hear me okay.
Yeah, I think maybe the sound is not super
Hello?
clear. I don't know if you can get a bit closer to the microphone.
Not sure. Unfortunately, I did have a room set up for myself, and my Wi-Fi has suddenly started to stop working, so I had to move to the main office. So apologies for the volume on this one. So anyway, good afternoon. Thanks, Ivan and Louis. My remit today is to talk a bit about the philosophy behind appraisal in Scotland, and then, as Adriana mentioned, some of the frequent problems that I encounter, and some of them will be common across the UK. So on the philosophy side of things, the Scottish guidance STAG does focus on the strategic business case, or strategic outline case, or strategic outline business case, depending on where you are. In Scotland, this stage typically covers the strategic and socio-economic dimensions, although if relevant to making the decision to proceed to outline business case, one or more of the financial, commercial, or management dimensions might also be covered. The first step in this process is to see if there is a case for change. I know Ivan mentioned it. I will try. Oh, no, I can't do that. I'm working out how to. Is that any better? Work out.
A little bit, yeah, thanks.
Sorry?
Yes, that's a little bit
That improve if I hold
clearer.
my laptop up. Yeah. Okay. So if it's a case for change, and the case for change explicitly, very explicitly, does not include what the change might be, i.e. there is no options in the case for change. This is the bedrock for your appraisal. It tells decision makers where society is now, where you want society to get to, but without the path to get there. If and only if you can demonstrate to decision makers that there really is a problem that needs to be solved or an opportunity to be exploited, and that these will not resolve themselves without public intervention, then we move into the solution space. Sorry, I'm not keeping up with my thing. Now, I'm a transport planner and I'm also chartered. Nonetheless, I would love to see my profession disappear. I am jumping ahead a little bit here as this appears on the next slide of problems, but what I always say to people, if you give a transport planner a transport problem, they will give you a transport solution. Yet, one of the first things we learn about in transport planning is that transport is a derived demand. Alas, 5 minutes later, we forget all about that. Now, the solution space that we should be working in combines transport, land use, and digital services, otherwise known as the triple access system. If you don't know what triple access system is or what triple access planning is, then please go and do some reading on it. Now, once you've generated a comprehensive set of options, then you sift them before going on to your final stage of detailed options appraisal. Instinctively, this sifting looks like a lot of work from what I've written there. However, the whole point of this is to actually reduce the amount of work done at the detail stage. If you've got, say, 50 options, you don't want to be doing a detailed appraisal of every single one of them. I think it is interesting reflecting back over what Louis was showing there about WELTAG. We're all looking at how to do proportionate appraisal, but coming at it in subtly different ways, but hopefully all towards getting faster, better outcomes. So this stage is really where the art of appraisal kicks in, as this is where options start to be rejected. Every option you take forward is going to cost time and money to appraise, and you're balancing that against the risk of making a decision with only partial information. For example, do you take forward to detailed appraisal a poor option that you're confident will fail but has strong public support? The process of appraisal does not give you that answer. That is part of the art of appraisal. So moving on to problems. So I'll go quite slowly here. Appraisal of public interventions is very difficult to do. We have to fight very hard against a lifetime of learnt behavior. That learnt behavior is about how we make personal choices. Every single personal choice that we make every day, be it what time we go to bed, what time we set the alarm, what to wear, eat, watch, read, etc., every single one of those choices is an appraisal. We're extremely skilled and efficient at doing it because we've been doing it on every choice we've made since the day we were born. We are so good at it that it feels instinctive. So we have a paradox. Appraisal is both very difficult and instinctively simple. The way I address this is to observe that one of the amazing paradoxes of being human is that our brains can simultaneously hold the idea that we are all unique and that everyone else is just like us. This is why the appraisal of personal choice is very easy for us. We know ourselves, we know what we want, but the appraisal of public intervention is very difficult because no one else is like us. But we tend to project our views onto all that work. I could spend a lot more time explaining this, but we've got to get through, so I'm going to summarize this one as hubris. That is exaggerated self-confidence, often leading to arrogance. If we take our skills in the appraisal of personal choice into our appraisal of public intervention, that's when it can all go wrong, very badly wrong. And please note that I do say we, not you. I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. It is so instinctive that it is not easy to overcome. All right, moving on. This one is where there is probably the biggest tension between me sitting here pontificating on how things should be done from my ivory tower and the reality of appraisal out there in the wild. When an appraisal brief comes out for, say, appraisal of insert name of a solution, somewhere in the world, an appraisal fairy has just died. This is very strongly linked to the first problem. Someone has in their head instinctively done the appraisal, reached the solution, and now they want you to justify the decision that they've already made. This is how we end up with the aphorism, there's more than one way to skin a cat. The tension here comes from the fact that we live in a democracy. If a minister says that they want an appraisal of insert name of solution, then we have to work with that. There is also the line challenge that they might announce a fund for insert name of solutions like active travel fund. Slightly different, but comes under this problem heading too. Nonetheless, if you can, please at every opportunity try to persuade people to commission the appraisal of a problem or an opportunity, not a solution. That will lead to better outcomes. Right, there are many potential shortcuts in the appraisal process, but by far and away the most frequent shortcut that I encounter is to not do the public engagement steps unless it is compulsory. I'm going to illustrate the public engagement problem with the bad fairy story. I got this from a book by Kate Clark. She's an archaeologist who incidentally wrote a lot of WELTAG, but prior to that spent many years working in heritage appraisal. So, when the baby princess was being christened, her mother, the queen, invited all the good fairies to the christening, but she forgot to invite the bad fairy. Of course, it was the bad fairy who later created many of the problems for the princess. So, that's a short story. An affected bad fairy may delay your intervention by many years and add millions to the cost in legal fees downstream. I can't guarantee that won't still happen, but simple early engagement can save a fortune in those areas. Right, I've already talked about the solution space, so moving on. Copy and paste. We all do it. It's efficient, but you are likely to carry forward both mistakes and out-of-date processes. And related to this is why we also get risk aversion. You can't do it that way because it's never been done that way before. The stagnation and paralysis that this brings about is somewhat ironic because the whole purpose of appraisal is to make the case to do something different. But you do get a lot of risk aversion in the supplier side of the system. And then the last problem I'm going to flag, nearly done, is when the wrong policies are followed or applied. And that is very pertinent to the fact that this webinar is looking at appraisal practice across the UK. We all follow a similar process, which is ultimately derived from a HM Green Book. Now, I do appreciate that it can sometimes be difficult to tease apart the difference between a policy and a process. But if you want to take an approach from the guidance of one administration and you cannot find that approach in the guidance or policies of the administration you're working in, you need to ask if that is acceptable. This is all the more complicated in the UK, where we also have reserved and devolved powers. So whilst Ivan was talking about England, some of the powers that the EFT have do extend across the whole of the UK. And of course, being transport, we have cross-administration interventions. But to try and illustrate this though, I have seen an appraisal for somewhere in Scotland where the Welsh Government policy that BCRs are to be presented with and without travel time savings were applied. That's not a criticism of the Welsh Government policy, but it is not Scottish Government policy. Therefore, it is not relevant in Scotland. Similarly, Ivan talked about the DFT value for money framework, and in there you've got the much misinterpreted table 5.1, which gives the BCR cutoff values. Yeah, everybody reads that document and then just looks at table 5.1. That's why Green Book says take less notice of BCRs. But I see that table copied into Scottish appraisal. We don't have that table in Scotland. It is DFT English policy. So, and that gets used again, and not least because of the copy and paste problem. So that's me. I hope that's been useful in understanding how some of the frequent problems I see in appraisal. Back over to you, Adriana.
Thank you very much. Very provocative talk, Stephen, which hopefully gave a lot of people food for thought. So thanks a lot. That was very interesting. So a lot to digest. There's been some questions coming in the chat, which I will read out in a moment. I just wonder first if you, listening to the other presenters, if you had some immediate reactions around any ideas of what we can learn from each other, and any immediate reactions or thoughts from the other presenters.
Okay, just make the observation that we do actually have a Four Nations appraisal meeting. Every now and again. It is ad hoc, but England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and sometimes Ireland and Network Rail turned up, and Highways Agency, if that's what they're now called. No, National Highways, or
National Highways.
yeah, have come on as well. So we do try and keep abreast of what each of us is doing. But obviously, have to take our own flavours to it. Ivan Louis.
Yeah, I think obviously TAG's developing all the time, isn't it? And it is a brilliant framework. Obviously, it's like world leading and kind of like a basis for a lot of appraisal around the world. And I think you can see that from, Stephen and I, what we're saying. We're just adding different layers to it and different policies and different directions. But fundamentally, that is what underpins, I think, a lot of transport appraisal guidance. It sets the standard, doesn't it, globally? I think as transport practitioners, obviously in the UK as well, maybe don't appreciate that as well in terms of how good it is. Obviously, as you know, everyone has a slight grumble when they're using it or about particular aspects, but it is fantastic in what it's able to do and kind of like how it's delivered. So yeah, I think obviously with further development of that going forward and maybe different directions, as we you can only I think you can only measure what you count, isn't it? I think it is probably the expression used, and maybe we need to look at starting to count slightly different things, but obviously it's an evolving kind of framework, and obviously in the age of like the digital age we now live in, I expect that to change even more, and I think it's quite exciting. But yeah, no, it's brilliant to see how it's evolving with time as well. Thank you.
Ivan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to add a point, last question to the other two speakers. And we've talked here about different countries in the UK. I wonder if there's a bit of a parallel to different regions in England, because I think over the next 5 years we'll see more block funding effectively devolved within England to different combined authorities. And I wonder if that raises the question of how much sort of autonomy in appraisal methods should come with that, and whether that means these regions also need to be making their own decisions like you have in Wales and Scotland as to what to prioritize in their appraisal guidance. I don't know what if there is a government policy or not, so that's just my own reflection. So I think that's something worth thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. That is a really important point because, yeah, I've seen personally some combined authorities or strategic authorities have quite defined appraisal frameworks and assurance processes. So it'll be good to see how that develops and if they, yeah, as you say, they have the autonomy to focus on specific policy issues or areas that they're more interested in. So yeah, really good point. So we're going to go through some of the questions in the chat. I'll try and cover as many as possible. We still have about 15 minutes. So there have been first a couple of comments on the BCR, and it's a first one around whether we have seen a pushback from stakeholders regarding the prioritization of the BCR, and another one kind of related on whether the push for this reduced emphasis has come from Treasury, who produces the Green Book. I mean, I think it's mostly come from the Chancellor, from my understanding. But what are your experiences in terms of whether you have seen any pushback on the prioritization of the BCR application of that value for money framework, which I guess, Ivan, in the case of TAG, you were saying that was already there. So any thoughts on this point?
I can probably comment on that bit in terms of Wales. The WELTAG is primarily used for Welsh government funds being a devolved administration, where obviously UK government funds for non-devolved infrastructure such as the South Wales Main Line in terms of rail infrastructure, we still use TAG and a blend of WELTAG and TAG. So we still use BCRs. So in order to secure UK government funds, BCRs are still used in terms of that WELTAG plus framework. There's not been any pushback in Wales or so far with the use of WELTAG guidance in terms of getting away from these BCRs. I think it's about meeting end user needs, as I kind of described in the presentation, and a lot of that is now developed through stakeholder interaction, public consultation, understanding of what the end users want, and then translating that in terms of the appraisal framework. We do still quantify a lot of this, but there's a less of an over-reliance on that using TAG units to inform that appraisal further and basically separate nuances between schemes. But there's a massive focus, obviously, on that public consultation element of it, with key stakeholders and obviously the public as part of that scheme development process. You know, when we talk about things like co-delivery, co-design, that's really strongly embedded in WELTAG as part of the 5 ways of working, as part of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. So that's the focus that we're taking, and we're not seeing pushback within Wales. But as I say, we still use BCRs for non-devolved schemes such as the South Wales Mainline, and obviously securing funding from UK government for those. I hope that answers the
Thank
question.
you.
I'm
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Yeah, really interesting to see the experience, and I haven't seen any pushback. Any others want to come in?
Well, I'll go in briefly. I think largely I'll see most come back doesn't come from decision makers, but people who have to present evidence to decision makers, and they feel that sometimes decision makers can't cope with having lots of information, and they want to reduce everything down to just a simple number, make it really, really, really easy to make the decision for the decision maker. And I'm kind of like, well, no, that's why we have decision makers. That's why they get paid a lot of money, is that they have to make difficult decisions, difficult trade-offs. There are complications. The policy landscape is really difficult. And so, yeah, I tend to find it's not too bad. But as I say, it's more, people have got more of a quantitative bent to themselves, maybe more in the engineering space. Sometimes they like to reduce everything down to numbers. But politicians they're used to dealing with things that are much more fuzzy.
That's very interesting that you think that the pushback is actually coming from practitioners and not decision makers. Ivan, any thoughts on this point?
Is this on the kind of
On the pushback on BCA, on if anyone is pushing back on and not relying so much on BCRs?
I mean, I think the kind of Treasury steer is quite clear and also reflects the body of stakeholder opinion that fed into that review. So I think generally it's support. I think there is a tension Stephen highlights though, which is the kind of bandwidth of decision makers. So on the one hand, you might want to engage with a sophisticated picture of, you know, monetized and unmonetized benefits. On the other hand, you might have a high volume of decisions to make in what is ultimately quite a sort of centralized decision-making process we have for a lot of decisions in the UK. So you don't have that much time to consider all aspects of every decision. You have to have some quick metrics to go to kind of get from your officials what's their best advice on value for money, kind of summarized as succinctly as possible. So I think there's a tension there, but I've seen not virtually all support for the Green Book changes, to be honest.
Thank you. I'm gonna go back to questions from Ton van Buren, who's one of our leading members of the subgroup in the TPS policy panel. So he's asking about qualitative outcomes. So he first has a question for Louis about how qualitative outcomes are used to make decisions when there are hard trade-offs. But also a question for Ivan, kind of related to this, about what can users in England learn from Wales in terms of the approach to qualitative benefits, and whether this approach might be transferable in the context that DfT guidance says that non-quantified impacts should be used to adjust the value for money of the scheme, which I wonder to what extent that actually happens in practice. So maybe first to Louis and then to Ivan.
Yeah, thanks, Adriana, and thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's something we're obviously grappling with when you've got like hard trade-offs and hard decisions to make in terms of assessing value for money, and that's what the appraisal framework's there to do. Is to distill those decisions within a framework that then enables decision makers to make that informed decision. I think, as I mentioned previously, and maybe answer this question in part, is there's a strong focus in stakeholder engagement as part of that and public consultation in order to inform that decision as best we can. We're using, you know, as I said before, quantitative analysis to still inform certain decisions, but not relying on it or a BCR essentially to make that decision. So we are still able to analyze differences between schemes quantitatively using that framework, but I wouldn't say it necessarily underpins that decision in the same way in something like a WELTAG Light, for example, or WELTAG Standard, where the level of risk and obviously investment is proportional to the kind of like appraisal process used. So yeah, I think that probably answers the question in short. There's obviously other things to incorporate in terms of trade-offs. There's obviously deliverability assessments, things like that when we're delivering schemes that are more kind of like engineering led, and obviously frameworks that we use to assess that within WELTAGs. And I'm sure obviously a lot of the people on the call as well, as a part of the overall appraisal, where clear trade-offs are made from decision makers. So I think it's just trying to build up as much kind of like information and data that we have, whether that be quantitative or qualitative, to make that decision and ultimately make those two trade-offs. And ultimately that trade-off is made by a decision maker at the top, informed by policy and obviously public opinion. But the appraisal framework's there to enable that. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis. Ivan, any thoughts on whether TAG could learn anything about how qualitative or well-being impacts are considered in WELTAG?
Yeah, I certainly think the issue of sort of qualitative impacts is difficult. Just to plug, we are actually doing some research at the moment on the materiality of non-monetized impacts, because I think it's recognised that it's quite subjective and it's a weaker part of our appraisal guidance, how to account for non-monetized things. But I don't think that answers all of Tom's question, because I think you're kind of getting at how should we think about these impacts beyond just their potential role in the kind of bottom line sort of value for money. I think that's where at the moment, as I read the two sets of guidance, there probably is more of a fundamental difference. I think it is challenging to sort of come up with, effectively, I think you're looking for rates of trade-off here, right? So are you willing to forego a worsening of one dimension to achieve a gain in another dimension? And if they're both expressed qualitatively, ultimately, and of course this is appropriate, that call is going to have to be pushed higher up the decision-making chain. And I think in my reading of WELTAG is that that's their approach. Whereas if you're looking at in a tag star method, the current guidance at least would be in a lot of those cases, the thing you're trying to do as the business case practitioner is actually come up with some evidence on what the net benefit is, which I guess can go alongside the qualitative thing. So in short, I think yes, we can learn some stuff from the WELTAG approach, but I think there's a lot of good things in the tag approach as well. So the two things can kind of sit alongside each other and complement each other. So it's a good question from Tom.
Yeah, definitely very interesting, and really good to hear that you're looking into the non-monetized impacts. I think that's a very interesting area, definitely. There's a really interesting comment and question for Stephen. I think, Stephen, related to your point about the fact that appraisal should be focused on solving a problem, which I very much agree with, and more of an outcome-led approach. But the person asking the question says that my experience is that very few local authorities have a clear definition of their local economic, social, environmental objectives other than internalized narrative, and this is a problem. What are your thoughts on this? How can transport planners appraise policy and schemes if there are no declared, defined economic, social, and environmental objectives?
Yes, I absolutely recognise that challenge, and I don't think it just applies to local authorities. It can apply regional, national, etc. And I think, ironically, in a sense, sometimes transport planning can help crystallise that question. I always remember early in my career, a former colleague of mine telling me about they'd spent a lot of time and money developing a large transport model, I think out in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or something along those lines. And at the end of it all, they concluded that the model wasn't very good as a model, but it was an absolutely brilliant tool to get everybody to talk about what the outcomes and objectives were. Because as soon as you started saying, well, do you have a value for where you want to be with traffic flows and journey time? No. Oh, yeah. Actually, well, I suppose we need to do that. So I would say the experience and knowledge we have in transport planning and the strength of the appraisal framework we have, which is generally far better than across most other sectors in government, I'm told by my economist colleagues, can actually help have that conversation and that question with local authorities and decision makers within the local authority.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a that's a really good point, that maybe we need to have this earlier phase to, if those objectives are in there, make sure we actually can agree on those. And I mean, that should be really the first step in terms of defining the SMART objectives. So that's really
I would just
helpful.
put again triple access planning, because that's part of what we discussed in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm trying to prioritize. We've got 5 minutes left. There is, and I know Louis needs to go very much 2 minutes before for an important meeting. There's just to mention that, yeah, there are definitely some comments agreeing with some of the things that the presenters have mentioned. There was a question earlier around how you could you outline how regional economic interdependencies and resilience are addressed within the modeling frameworks? It seems quite a technical question, and how these factors influence scenario development and appraisal. So regional economic interdependencies and resilience. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you've hit on the answer actually there in your question, which is around scenarios. Yeah, it's an age-old problem you have around what comes first, chicken and egg. I mean, do you work out what your land use is and then work out what your transport is? Do you work out what transport is, then do the land use? Do you want to know what your economy is? Do you decide where the people are going to live first, or do you decide where the businesses are going to live first, or do you work in transport to try and influence where the people are going to live and the businesses are going to go? These are all massively complicated things where you've got to have somebody deciding what it is the kind of almost like the value that you're trying to go for. What's the proper objective that you're after? Because it's not usually about travel time savings. It's usually about trying to live a better country, and we just measure whether the intervention we're doing helps towards that, and check whether it's good value for money with the BCR. So I would say, yeah, scenarios is how you have to deal with that.
Any final thoughts from others before we close?
I mean, I could just quickly, just as another plug, but we've been thinking about the role of resilience. I know this can mean different things, but if we're talking about resilience of infrastructure to things like climate change or the ability of projects to improve resilience of the network, then yeah, I think we need to do more on that. Broadly, I think we can look at that through trying to, again, model different scenarios, what happens when these things go wrong. So watch this space for some publications on that. I think the other question of regional interdependencies is even trickier, and not sure we've cracked that, but yeah, I think that should be a key area of focus in the AMS. I'm thinking here particularly about like spatial economy modelling and how investments in one part of the country might affect growth across the country. They're big questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks very much. Louis just had to drop off, but thanks very much to our speakers for your time and presenting lots of really good points and interesting areas that to watch out for. I think just a few that caught my attention. I think the AIME study is being published tomorrow. That's very, very exciting. Thoughts around how well-being and non-monetized impacts could be better accounted for across the different guidance. The really strong focus from Stephen on an outcome-led and a solution-led approach, and really engaging early engagement with the right people to make sure that options are well defined. And mistakes in copying and pasting from one appraisal to the other. All the analysis that DFT are doing on other impacts, including resilience impacts, etc. So yeah, lots to discuss. Very interesting to hear as well that you guys meet across the 4 nations regularly. That would be very interesting to hear those discussions. And thanks everyone for joining this event, which I believe has been one of the most popular ones that TPS has organized. So thanks very much for your time. And I guess we will be in touch. I think we need to check. There was a question about sharing slides, so we'll check that with the speakers and share what we were able to share. So we'll be in touch about that. So thanks again. And yeah,